So Dark Phoenix is the end of the X-Men prequel saga. We've started with X-Men First Class in 2011, and then we've gone from Days of Future Past to X-Men Apocalypse, and now we're at Dark Phoenix. Now you might remember we kind of ended like similarly with X-Men: The Last Stand, back with the original series. Like it ended with the whole Phoenix deal. Jean Grey, the psychic who became just like a destructive force that had to be stopped. Kind of ends the same way here, and a bit unfortunately, because as I've been saying, X-Men films, I feel they're an ensemble group, but I feel like they work best when they kind of focus on, just like a small amount of characters and give them an arc to them. Focus on them, give them an arc, because if there's too much going on, then we can't focus on too many. And thankfully, I kind of like this aspect from where they take Dark Phoenix, where we do focus on Jean Grey. We start with her from the beginning, we see how she was a kid and she dealt with her powers, and then we, fast forward to the present, which again, keeping in line with the X-Men prequel saga, we again jump ahead another decade for some strange reason. I always found this strange. Like, each X-Men film has jumped ahead another decade, and yet they still look the same. Like, X-Men First Class, we started in the 60s. Days of Future Past, we started in the 1970s. Apocalypse was in the 1980s. And now we're in the 1990s. 40 years they've spanned, and man, that Charles Xavier, he's looking pretty good for spending 40 years in the business. I mean, him and Hank McCoy as Beast and Raven, and man, they're looking looking pretty good. I think these mutants are in it for the long haul, even though this is unfortunately the last film. But there's an interesting angle here, because we focus on this one character of Jean Grey. Well, we kind of focus on her and a little bit more of Raven, or Mystique, if you prefer. She's once again played by Jennifer Lawrence. And there's a little bit of dissension in the ranks. So apparently, like, at this point in the story, the X-Men kind of have like a decent influence in society. Humans view them favorably. They go on missions. They save the day. People champion them. They love them. And Charles feels like we're doing good work. We have good press. We have great PR. People are accepting of mutants. But Raven's seeing that, I don't think this is working. Something's wrong here. So, like, I think you might be selling us short here. I think you're trying to play too much by the rules. Now, we've heard this before. We've heard this, especially from people like Raven, saying, like, I don't think we need to ask for humans' permission. I think we need to take more charge. But more than that is that she feels that she's been devalued. Mostly because she feels like, some of the X-Men are being, like horribly devalued. Specifically, Jean Grey. Because Jean Grey, who's played here by, reprising the role from Apocalypse, is, I forgot her name. Sophie Turner. Why did I forget Sophie Turner? Game of Thrones. Okay, so Sophie Turner is playing Jean Grey, and she's arguably the most powerful mutant they've got. So powerful that she's got to keep her powers under control, but then an alien force comes and infests her body and basically makes her super powerful. Now she has too much power. And because she has so much of this power, it unleashes these dark secrets that have been kept from her, specifically like stuff that like Charles was trying to hold her back from. Because that's the interesting thing here. I love the fact that like Jean is trying to come to terms with both her powers and herself, and feeling like she really doesn't belong, and that she's just like a social misfit. And at the same time, you also have Charles, so crippled with trying to do the right thing that he's not willing to admit that he's wrong. So you kind of have this interesting now. I love the fact that like Jean Grey is now this kind of like unstoppable mutant with way too much power. It kind of like I was kind of thinking about this. It's kind of like an interesting blend between kind of like Carrie and Akira, where she kind of has all this power and feels like she's been wronged by society and just wants to take her revenge out on it. And it could be, and a lot on this aspect, it could have been a really cool film. It could have been really cool. It could have just been a complete female revenge film, and it seemed like it was going in that direction. But again, like, in order for it to go that far, I feel like you might have to turn it into a horror film at that point, because it gets pretty close to horror with how like Jean Grey is struggling with these powers and how she just like unleashes them and kind of pushes society away. It could have been like that cool horror film, but unfortunately, because it's a PG-13 X-Men film, and because it feels like it's kind of like going right in line with the other X-Men movies, We don't get that. We don't, or if we do get that, here's the problem though. Because we're still focusing on too many characters though. Because like again, because not only do we have that though, we focus a little bit more on Jean, but at the same time we got to focus on other characters. Like we got to establish how Cyclops has feelings for Jean and how he's a little bit intimidated by her, which we only get to see in like two brief scenes. One scene where they're holding hands and another scene where she flat out asks if he feels intimidated. We have to focus on how, you know, Beast and Mystique are connecting with each other because they too feel that they've been wrong, because like they're kind of the only remaining X-Men from like First Class, and they feel like they don't really have much of a place here. But again, we don't have time to explore that because we got too much else going on. Specifically, we've got aliens who have come from the stars because they want that power that's in Jean Grey, and they're trying to convince her to hand it over. I don't know why they need it though. These aliens seem really powerful. Like bullets can't stop them. They can shapeshift anything they want. They can literally twist like body parts just with like a turn of their hands. So I'm not sure what they need with this power. I think they need it to like rebuild their society or something like that. But they're led by Jessica Chastain, or at least a Jessica Chastain vessel. And she just kind of like quietly comes onto the scene and just kind of just uses her very, very calm and soft words to say, "Hey, Jean, you know, why don't you screw these guys and come hang out with us in space?" Or just hand over that power. She's just basically trying to manipulate her. And unfortunately, because we have that aspect of the story, we can't really focus on the more interesting aspect of like, you know, coming to terms with yourself. And kind of like this horror movie aspect of like dark secrets that are unearthed that really do kind of like shatter the worlds of these characters. Because that's the problem. Like I know like some people have complained about this with they released kind of like the one kind of like telling clip from the film where Raven basically tells off Xavier, saying like, you know, I don't think you're really paying attention to what's going on with the X-Men in the field. I think Jean is kind of like the real star of this brigade of superheroes. Like maybe you should call it the X-Women. It's like that's kind of like a throwaway zinger. Like, and the thing is, that's actually an interesting scene. That it shouldn't just end with a zinger. It needs to end with something that's really gonna punch Charles in the face. Because I know, like, I know, I see this coming. I know it's gonna happen. You're gonna have some people online complaining that, oh, this film is too feminist. I don't think this film is feminist enough. I think, like, it's on the track to go there, but it feels like because it has to adhere to the superhero formula, that it's really holding itself back. And that's mainly because I don't think it embraces too much of a genre. Like, you know, other X-Men films have worked by embracing a particular genre when showcasing that character. Like I said, with Logan, it felt like a neo-Western. And it feels like this type of story should have been a horror film. It should have been like a crazy psychological horror film of Jean Grey just kind of like shoving others away. And there are, like I said, there are moments in here where it does feel like horror. Where it's just like, oh, it's right there. Just grab it. I'm telling you, it's right there. Just make it a horror film. Just make it rated R. It's the last X-Men film. Who cares? Just do something interesting with it. Have it like be like a grand send-off here. Because I think that's the biggest problem, though, is that, you know, this film, it's lacking so much. It's lacking place. We don't really feel like it takes place in the 1990s. It could have taken place just a few years after Apocalypse. It could have taken place in 1988. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the location. We don't really get a lot of aspects of how, like, the human world relates to the mutants in terms of, like, the politics. They're just kind of, like, they kind of come up a little bit when they're convenient, and then just kind of slowly go back under the rug for no reason at all. And the film itself, like, this is the last X-Men film, or maybe they didn't know it would be the last X-Men film in this prequel saga, that it just kind of feels like business as usual for this entry. It doesn't really feel like a send-off. It doesn't really feel like, like this is the last time we'll see these characters, so we give them kind of like, like a send-off, a grand send-off. It just kind of feels like business as usual. And it's mostly because we kind of go through a lot of the same emotions with the other characters. We have Michael Fassbender back once again as Eric, who will once again become Magneto, but I swear, like, his role in this film is literally the same as it was in Apocalypse, where he says, like, I'm done with the mutant life, I'm done with the human world, I'm gonna go live as a hermit. But then some pathos will come. It's like, oh, well, there's my pathos cue. Time to whip back on the helmet and become the big old bad Magneto. Once again. It doesn't really add anything to it because, like I said, this is a script where, because there's so much going on, a lot of the emotions, which are interesting, and there's some interesting drama here, everyone has to wear their emotions like on their sleeve. Everyone has to outright say what they're feeling at that exact moment. They have to explain what's happening at that exact moment. Everything is kind of just doled out here because it seems like they don't have a lot of time. Because I was astonished. This film is actually under 2 hours, which is kind of an accomplishment. Except it feels like everything is rushed in there. If anything, it kind of feels like the X-Men animated series, where they would try to adapt stories from the comics, but they would shove them all together in like one really condensed package that was just way too fast that you could barely appreciate anything in it. It kind of feels like that. I will give them credit though. At least they did, because the Dark Phoenix arc, it's got like a lot of like weird filler stuff in there, and I'm glad they chopped a lot of like this extra crap out. I just think they need to cut a little bit more here because it doesn't really feel like we get the full story on Jean here. Now, of course, you know, this is like a big problem for the film, but of course, what's going to be a big deal breaker that I'm sure a lot of people are going to forgive the film for is the action. Yes, it does have some cool action, and this kind of saves the film from becoming a complete train wreck. It does have some cool sequences. There's a great scene where I believe they're battling in New York, and Magneto uses his powers to make like a subway come out of the ground. That's pretty cool. And then, of course, we get the really cool... well, I mean, before that, we get a cool space rescue. That's pretty interesting, how they use their abilities in space. It was kind of neat. But then we get to the climax of there's a big battle on the train, where all the X-Men are using their powers to kind of fight off like all the aliens trying to attack them. Which was actually, I mean, like the way it's constructed, it's actually pretty cool. The visual effects are nice. I love the way the action is choreographed here, how all the X-Men feel like they're using the full potential of their powers here. In particular, if you really like Nightcrawler, who's once again played in the film by Cody Smith-McPhee, you're probably going to love him in this sequence, because he actually does let loose, and you do get to see a more violent side of Nightcrawler, which was kind of a little bit unexpected, and I kind of dug that aspect. I did kind of dig how Magneto uses his powers here to be a little bit more lethal. I thought that was interesting. It always kind of felt like, you know, these characters have so much power, and they always feel held back here. The train sequence, it feels like they're going off. They're using everything. Like Storm has so much like powers of like, you know, storms and electricity and weather, and she uses them pretty well here. Magneto uses his powers. Beast gets really brutal and vicious. So yeah, the action is pretty good, but like I said, like the action is fun if you can distance yourself from the fact that this story of this kind of like rise and fall of Jean's story, which should be more interesting. It should pack a bigger punch. It's just not landing the blows. It's just not there, and that's the problem. Is because like you know, ultimately the film just kind of like burns out. But hey, you know, it's the last X-Men prequel film. You know, maybe they've been troubled here. Maybe the next version of X-Men will actually like, you know, better focus on the themes and the allegories that made X-Men so interesting and important here, and not just kind of just, you know, throw really good looking action on top of more interesting stories here, because that's the problem here. It feels like the action is really dominant in this story that should, like I said, it should be like a female revenge film, and it's just not there. It feels phoned in from this aspect, and which is really sad. It's really sad to see this rather, I mean, there's been hills and valleys, but I gotta admit, I was kind of digging this prequel series for most of its run. I mean, I love these characters. I love the cast they've assembled here, and it's just unfortunate that this is the note we got to go out on for the Dark Phoenix. So, for the Dark Phoenix, 2 out of 5 stars.